My name is Annie Nielsen. I'm a member of Reconciliation for Western Sydney, and I have been for close on 20 years. Not quite at the beginning, but for a long time. We've been existing for up close to 25 years, I think. And we've been holding Building Bridges for about 22 years. So, but this is our first virtual Building Bridges. So we're very, very grateful to have our two speakers tonight. And I think I'll leave the rest of the comments I have until the end, except to introduce our speakers. So we have Tabitha. Tabitha Lean is a Gunditjmara woman born and raised on Kaurna country in South Australia. As a formerly incarcerated woman, Tabitha is a staunch abolitionist. Her research interests include abolition of the prison industrial complex, radical reimaginings of crime and justice as it relates to her people, Aboriginal identity, the Aboriginal incarceration experience and the decolonisation of institutions. Tabitha is head editor of a blacked-out edition of Verse magazine to be released in October, and also wrote an article on how allies can support First Nations people on January 26th. And I might leave the introduction of Debbie until she's ready to speak next. The speakers will spend about a half an hour, but they can go over if they want to, but so about 15 minutes each. And we then have questions. So I imagine questions won't take half an hour, so if they want to go a little bit over, that won't be a problem at all. And I will hand over to Tabitha to speak to you. Thanks, Tabitha.
Thanks, Annie. Nyata, nyataman, nyatuk nyat leon, Buddha minyan, nyatuk Gunditjmara, weapa, wango nuntu, wanyo pimia, alamin Ghana, miring, tinwa nye, yana popamiri. Yada everyone, my name is Tabitha. I'm also called Buddha Minyan. I would like to start by acknowledging the custodians of the unceded ancestral lands of the Kaurna people, on whose land I am fortunate to be living and working on this evening. I acknowledge that my existence in this space and place is leveraged off the continued dispossession of the Kaurna people from their country. And to this end, I commit to walking in this space with soft feet and the utmost respect. And I also want to acknowledge the custodians of the nations, of the lands that each of you sit on today, because no matter where you are standing in this country, this is stolen land. I would also like to specifically acknowledge my brothers, sisters and kin who are incarcerated in their own country. My brothers, sisters and kin who are struggling just to survive in a colony designed to erase, brutalise and kill. I also acknowledge the consistent frontline labour undertaken by Aboriginal families who have had family members die in custody. I acknowledge those with lived prison experience who continue to show up to demand justice and to speak up with determination that no other family should endure the violence and deadly consequences of the criminal punishment system in this country. And I want to acknowledge the role of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations in the provision of programs and services in this space, as well as Aboriginal leaders who have been fighting to address the persistent criminalisation and imprisonment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our own country. So before I start my presentation, I just want to lay out a couple of things. I've made some notes which I will refer to during this presentation. It's something I find myself doing more and more when I speak. And the reason for this is because I want to be quite specific and considered with the words and language that I use, and very deliberate about the information I present. There are two reasons for this. One is that I'm still tethered to the system. So anything I say about the criminal punishment system has the very real capacity to threaten my liberty. And secondly, so often when bloodfallers speak up or speak out about matters that affect us, we are disregarded as angry or aggressive. And this means that we have to moderate what we say so that you will hear us. It's additional labour, but I'm learning that it's essential labour. I also want to preface this yarn by saying that nothing I say here this evening will be extraordinary. I am not extraordinary. I am simply a manifestation of my ancestors' struggle for survival. It is by their grace that I do this work. Nothing I say will not have already been said by hundreds of my people before me. I indeed stand on the shoulders of giants. Further, I just want you to know I don't hold myself out to be an expert on these matters. I'm also not a criminologist or a lawyer. I'm a formerly incarcerated woman who has so far made it through the system alive. So please know that today I am speaking from my own lived experience and expertise, and that is I'm presenting one point of view on very complex matters. Anyway, some of you know me, there's some familiar faces in the crowd, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. Situating myself in all of my work is a cultural practice and responsibility handed down to me by my old people. It's important for context, and it's our way. In my introduction, I told you that I'm a Gunditjmara woman born and raised on Kaurna Yurta. So my country spans the southwestern areas of the land you now call Victoria. My mother was raised away from country and grew up in Jiabo and Jarawa Nation, coming to live on Kaurna country as an adult. My family's connection with their own nation was disrupted when my kukun was moved from Victoria to Sydney and then separated from their lineage. Then my mother was killed when I was a baby, so I grew up without her and her knowledge. I have 3 kids who also have Ngarrindjeri, Boandik and Māori heritage. My work history is that I started out as a junior primary and primary teacher. I then went and worked in politics for 10 years as a political staffer. After 10 years, I got really tired of election cycles and went back into schools managing Aboriginal study centres. And finally, I went into the state government where I managed Aboriginal health for the northern and central regions of Adelaide. And then along the way, my life took a very sharp nosedive. And after a raft of shitty decisions and circumstances, I spent some time in prison. I am a criminalised woman, having spent 3 years on bail, 4 weeks in the Supreme Court of South Australia, almost 2 years in a prison for deviant women, and an accumulative 2 years on home detention. I will be tethered to the state for 3 more years on parole, or as I like to call it, open air prison. I am number 177057. I've made mistakes in my past and some of them were despicable. I remain an unwilling pawn in the colonial project, and my criminal record has forever altered my dialogical relationship with the state. In fact, I will likely be never free of their bonds, and perhaps as an Aboriginal woman, this was always inevitable. Add to that, my face was flashed across the TV and newspapers. My life became a magazine anyone could thumb through. And the reason I'm telling you this is not to offer myself up for your judgment, because I'm not, but because I know how people like their information packaged in bundles of objectivity. Today, though, this presentation is completely cloaked in subjectivity, or as Tyson Yunkaporta calls it, a filthy reality of belongingness, because I'm bringing my lived experience as a criminalised black woman in this country to the yarn today. Personally, I think it makes it authentic and genuine in a way you wouldn't otherwise get. So I am one of this country's disposable people, but mostly I am black and I have survived. But more than 400 of my people have not. As of today's count, more than 440 Aboriginal men and women have been killed by this country's carceral system since 1991, a system which represents nothing more than a brutal, violent and deadly colonial frontier. Right now, there are approximately 43,028 people in custody. That's 43,028 disposable humans. And of those 40,000 plus people, 1/3 are on remand. That's thousands of people who have not been convicted of a crime, yet sit in cages at the mercy of what this country calls justice. Of those 40,000 plus people, today, right now, this evening, there are around 12,000 Aboriginal people in custody. More than a quarter of our prison population are my mob. 3/4 have been to prison before. We are overrepresented in every area of the criminal injustice system. And once we go through that door, we revolve around time and again. But the disproportionate rate of Aboriginal incarceration in this country is not a new phenomenon. Almost 3 decades ago, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody noted that we are arguably the most incarcerated group of First Peoples in the world. And I just want to make a quick note here to say that the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody was a watershed document, but it was actually part of a longer Aboriginal community discourse that had sought, since the violent invasion of this country, to reduce Aboriginal contact with the colonial criminal punishment system. And of course, the delegates of the Uluru Statement from the Heart assert we are not an innately criminal people. And yet here we sit again tonight, pondering what can be done to address this human rights issue. Well, good news, everyone, because we have the answers. We have always had the answers. And the thing is, that's because the answers are located at the margins, a place we have dwelled since you stepped on our shores. We know that colonisation criminalises our people. Our very existence and survival has become an act of radical revolution. Colonisation abuses black minds, black bodies, black lands, black waters. Colonisation locks us out of housing markets, job markets, labour markets. And this colony is built on a bedrock of intergenerational economic prosperity, whereby the governments give black people free stuff while purposefully not giving those same resources and opportunities to us. And then there's the irony of those handouts becoming the stereotype of contemporary Aboriginality. So sadly, our grandmothers, mothers, sisters and aunties are left to grieve. They grieve the loss of their sons and daughters to every kind of colonial frontier that exists in this country. This is a time of black rage, black grief and perpetual sadness. 232 years of rage and grief, in fact, because we have lived in a state of perpetual torment since white man first stepped on our shores. So when people ask me, what can we do to stop black deaths in custody? I say, stop locking us up. Stop caging our kids. Stop chasing us down. Stop exiling us. Stop brutalising us. Just stop killing us. I said at the start of this talk that this was a complex issue. And on the surface, crime and punishment appear to be unsophisticated matters. After all, so many people are fond of saying, do the crime, do the time. But the thing is, the intersection between colonisation and criminalisation is complex. It's all-pervading and all-consuming, and each relies on the other, so much so that they are intricately woven together, inseparable. Crime and punishment are in fact multidimensional problems, and prisons and police are a deliberate part of the arsenal of the settler colonial war machine, whereby the criminal punishment system continues to contribute in a real way to maintaining the economic and social hierarchy in this country, and is a crucial element to progressing and maintaining the colonial project through the consistent and persistent subjugation of Aboriginal people. The infrastructure of the prison industrial complex, so the entire overlapping interests of state and industry that employ policing, surveillance, imprisonment, punishment, are just a means of controlling black people and furthering this colony. The tentacles of the prison industrial complex are literally everywhere. I mean, it's a parasitic beast. It flicks my people off like fleas from a mongrel dog's back. So while the problem is complex, the solution is actually very simple. Just stop locking us up. In this country and abroad, prisons have been used to control and cage those marginalised by class, race, gender, sexuality and ability, and have protected the most powerful from being held accountable while silencing the rest of us. That old two-tiered justice system thing. I mean, in this country, the people who have caused serious harm to my people are not currently in prison and never will be. And that is why I have no interest in reforming a white supremacist system built with the purpose of oppressing, controlling and facilitating the premature death of my people. So this is where abolition comes in, right? This is why I'm a staunch and unwavering and unapologetic abolitionist. I'm an abolitionist and I'm saying that it's not okay that we are murdering and brutalising black people behind bars, in the backs of correctional services vans, in our police cells and on the streets. We have to start to imagine different kinds of justice. a justice free of prisons, surveillance and policing. This is an opportunity to imagine a future free of punishment, imprisonment and exile. And you know, abolition may sound like a radical new idea, but people have been working towards it for decades. Certainly Aboriginal people have been fighting against the enslaving and incarcerating of our people for 232 years. Safety, be that individual or community safety, cannot come without freedom and justice, because who we are and what we are comes from the alchemy of our struggles. If we dismantle systems that cage and punish, we can explicitly fight genocide and dispossession and create a world focused on radical reciprocity and accountability. And while abolition is the preeminent demand of our movement, abolition needs to be more than just a political vision. It needs to be the will of the people. Because we have an opportunity right now to develop revolutionary and transformative community-based solutions, rather than rely on a system that reinforces and perpetuates violence. This is a crucible moment. We are seeing a powerful condemnation of racism and carceral violence across the world. The call to build a world without prisons has never been louder. But this is also a troubling moment. It's troubling because it is characterised by a renewed confidence amongst far-right groups. I guess it's made more confident and emboldened by the election of the likes of Trump, Boris Johnson and even Scott Morrison, and their nationalist rhetoric in conservative politics. But there is a similar renewal among anti-racists and anti-fascists. So this is our chance. This is our chance to dismantle policies, practices and institutions that make people disposable. Because we absolutely should challenge the ubiquitous belief that there are throwaway people. This is our chance to abolish systems and professions that are anti-Black and pro-colonial. Abolition is a necessary element of decolonial struggle. It's rooted in collective care and values of mutual aid. Abolition is a movement that is anti-capitalist, anti-colonial, anti-sexist, anti-racist. It is feminist, intersectional, internationalist, environmental and pro-cooperation. And while it is absolutely about overturning and disestablishing, it is also a building project, a reconstructive process, an invitation to think about how we want to be in relationship with each other, with property and with institutions. And I don't have all the answers, but that's the really fun part. Imagining abolition lets us start dialogues of curiosity, to enter realms of possibility, to imagine ways to centre community, to focus on abundance and healing, not scarcity and harm, to imagine transformative approaches which prioritise health, well-being and safety. We literally have an opportunity to build a world focused on radical reciprocity and accountability, not retribution and revenge. And look, we may not all be on the same page right now about what abolition looks like or what it could look like, but that's cool, because Ruth Wilson Gilmore says it's important to spar and to work out our differences, because not everyone in the room, and certainly not everyone in the abolitionist movement, is on the same page right now. And there's no need to pretend otherwise. There is real strength in that difference. And that's not to say that we will entertain some watered down version of abolition where reform creeps in as the compromise. But abolition is a verb, right? We are doers. We're doing the two-pronged work, tearing down and dismantling and disestablishing all systems that suck the very life from our Black souls, while building new systems which will breathe the breath of life back into community and care. As Marion Carter says, abolition is in the present. We are doing it every single day in multiple kinds of ways. It's not just a horizon we'll arrive at someday, it's constantly being made. And that's super important for everyone to remember, because we're going to have to try, test, pioneer and pilot. So to finish this part of my yarn, I guess I want to issue a call to action. I want you to think about what abolition work you can do every day in your own life. Liberating our bodies requires us also to liberate our minds. And while self-care is important, self-worth is just as important. So you could start to think about how you can include abolitionist theories into your job, your home life, even your parenting. And start to challenge the ubiquitous belief that some people are disposable. Start questioning why governments sell the building of new prisons in our communities as progress or good for the economy. Start asking, why is it okay that we strip search 10-year-old kids in prison? Start questioning whether we should be locking up a mother for not being able to pay a fine. Start to stand up, speak up and speak out, and be consistent, because half measures are killing us. Support Aboriginal families who have had family members killed in custody. Sometimes this will look like donating to their GoFundMe pages. Sometimes it will be sharing their post on social media. Sometimes it will be writing to your Member of Parliament demanding an end to the criminalisation and incarceration of Aboriginal people. It might look like demanding that no new prison beds be created in your state. It might look like calling for the defunding of police. It might look like standing with us at the Black Lives Matter protest, or simply calling out your racist uncle at the family barbecue. And if you are asked to speak or write about Black deaths in custody, Black Lives Mattering, or abolition, and you look around and you see no one with lived prison experience having their voice elevated, weaponise your privilege and share your platform, because our voices are valid in this space, because we are experts in our own oppression, and there should be nothing at all about us without us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabitha. That was an amazing talk. I think there's a lot for us all to think about. And before I introduce Debbie, I'd like to say I forgot to say, and I guess I was nervous, but I forgot to welcome everybody to the lands, whatever they are on, and acknowledge the elders past and present. And so I do humbly apologise for that. And, you know, it was there in my heart. I just didn't put it out. And also I didn't mention to people that they could ask questions, but I think people know that. However, I've only had a few questions, so maybe we'll keep the questions until the end. And if anybody else wants to ask any questions from things that Debbie spoke about, please pop them in the chat. I will record them, and then we can have the questions at the end. So yes, very, very powerful, Tabitha, and I'm sure you'll have people thinking about lots of those issues that you have talked about. So our next speaker is Debbie Kilroy, OAM. Debbie's from Queensland, and she's a former prison worker, a former prisoner working to end violence, to abolish prison industrial complex and support young women to lead. Last year, Debbie mounted a crowdfunding campaign to pay off the court debts of Aboriginal women incarcerated in Western Australia for defaulting on fines. Debbie Kilroy is one of Australia's leading advocates for protecting the human rights of women and children through decarceration, the process of moving away from using prisons and other systems of social control in response to crime and social issues. And Tabitha and Debbie are in the National Network of Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Children. And I presume people can find more about that by looking on a website. Would that be correct, Tabitha?
Yes, Debbie might be able to talk a little bit more about the network and where people can get information about that.
Fantastic. Well, then I'd like to ask Debbie to speak. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, and thank you, Tabitha. That was awesome. Big clap. And that's very difficult to follow. So thank you, my sister. Before I do speak, though, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, unceded Meanjin, where I reside, and acknowledge Jagera, Yugara and Turrbal people, elders past and present here. I'd like to acknowledge, I know that Nina and Alini are on the Zoom meeting and they are part of the national network, and I've sort of gone through. If I've missed someone, please let me know, type a message. But there's a few of us here that are part of the national network of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls on the Zoom tonight. So please feel free to ask questions about anything that we have to say. I was going to talk, and I'll talk a bit about Sisters Inside and the network, but I suppose when I was listening to you, Tabitha, I'm thinking, are you uncomfortable? That's a question that I've got to ask you all. Are you uncomfortable? Because I know when I listen to Tabitha and other Black women talk about the invasion of this country and the ongoing colonising within state structures and policies, I feel very uncomfortable. And I think we all need to feel uncomfortable. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable about our horrific past in this country that we call Australia now, and how this country was invaded and land was stolen, and the driver was genocide, to kill all First Nations people in this country. So if you're not uncomfortable, if you're not mad, you actually need to get uncomfortable and get mad. Go and read, get some, you know, talk to local Aboriginal people where you come from to find out the truth of what's actually happened where you live, the massacres, the stolen land, and the ongoing invasion of this country, and how we've seen white fellas like myself invade this country and then, you know, introduce racial capitalism, which is a driver that needs police and prisons to prop it up and protect it. And so we need to unpack that. We need to find a way to think, if you like, outside the bars about how we can do things very different in our community. And I think COVID-19 has actually given us an opportunity to think about what's happening for us, not only as individuals, but as a community within the isolation of our homes, where we've become so isolated, and our individualization within the racial capitalist world has not protected us and won't protect us from the pandemic that racial capitalism has created. So we need to start thinking about that, and we need to question. You know, Tabitha talked about questioning, and I want to question, like, why. You may not even know, and it might be a good thing to go and check out that. But here in Queensland, in 1819, police and prisons were funded to the tune of $3.2 billion. $3.2 billion for 1 year. And what was funded for social housing, affordable housing, which we all know, marginalised people need affordable housing. Many of you yourself need affordable housing that was zoomed in tonight. 425 million. So we see how racial capitalism works, how even our governments are funding police and prisons to control us and to protect property where they're actually not protecting people. Maybe protecting some of us, but definitely not protecting all of us in this country. And so we need to start thinking outside the bars about what we're actually doing and how we want to live and how we want to relate to each other. You know, we need to reconcile our violent past of the invasion of this country. We need to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land. We need to hand back land to the rightful owners and do the reparation so we can actually move forward. Until we do that, we are actually just going to keep recycling generation after generation the harm that we continue to inflict on First Nations peoples in this country. I want to acknowledge too the women right now who are in prison and the girls. It's 7 o'clock at night here, 7:30 some places, 8:30 or 8 o'clock, I think, New South Wales. I get the time zones mixed up, but I mean, it's all different times. So what we have now is the women and girls who are incarcerated across this country are now locked in their cells. Now, some may have already been locked in their cells for long periods of time because of COVID. And so they're in solitary confinement. They've had no contact with their family. They've had no contact with their children today. We have had the privilege to be able to get on our computers, our phones, our whatever it is, and to Zoom in to have this conversation together. And that is a very privileged position. I know that some of you thinking that, well, people commit crime, so therefore they go to prison. I don't see it that way as an abolitionist. And I see it that we are criminalised. So what we see is that there has to be a certain group of people, and it's predominantly Black people in this country, that have to be pipelined into state-controlled structures. So whether that's the so-called child protection system, then into the youth prison system, it could be resi care, where we know children, particularly Aboriginal children, are criminalised and pipelined into youth prisons and adult prisons. There's only certain people in our country that criminalised and imprisoned. There is not equality before the law. It is a lie. You know, we have a criminal legal system. We do not have a criminal justice system. we have enough resources in this country to ensure that not one person is homeless. We have enough resources in this country to hand back the land to the rightful owners, to be the custodians to care for that land, and then to be able to have the conversations about how we unite and live together and repair the pain of the past, the trauma. You know, something my sister in the US says, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, and she says, life is precious, life is precious. But and that means everybody's life, not just yours, not just mine, but everybody's. So even the people that may behave in a way that you don't agree with, people that do terrible things, you know, I know some people will be thinking, what do you do with the murders and rapists? Well, can I tell you, that's not who's just in prison. We know we don't do anything with murderers and rapists now. So we actually need to think outside the bars about how we can create a community that creates other modes of safety and security, because the one that we have now does not assist any of us, and particularly the most marginalised children and people, and as I said before, First Nations people. When I was in prison, you know, and it's interesting, abolition is the destiny, the abolition of the prison industrial complex, and decarceration is the journey, the path that we travel to get to the abolition of the prison industrial complex. That's how I see it. So there's work to be done every day, and Tabitha talked about the work that you can do yourself. But at Sisters Inside, when we started Sisters Inside, is when I was actually in prison some decades ago. My friend was brutally murdered sitting beside me. And what the response to that was to lock us all down, and prison officers could leave and go home and take stress leave, but we were left isolated to deal with a murder ourselves. Now, prisons are violent places, and violence begets violence in prisons. But from that, you know, and there's obviously a long story about that. But out of that, Storm, who murdered my friend, so she was a young woman then, and she murdered my friend sitting beside me. I was stabbed twice trying to stop the attack. I survived, and Debbie, her name was Debbie too, did not survive. But here's Storm, a young woman who has actually, you know, been very violent and murdered another woman inside prison, and it was unheard of then. And it's, you know, and it's the only murder in the prison in this country still today. But when Storm was brought back, she was sent over to the men's prison in isolation. And when I came back from the hospital, and you know, we started to get let out of our cells, etc., they brought Storm back to the prison, the women's prison, and put her in isolation in that prison, the old Bogger Road prison. And I remember her screaming, and I can still feel it in the pits of my being, of the trauma that she was experiencing, and being in isolation, solitary confinement for a very long time, and being treated horrifically because of what she had done. And I remember hearing that, and it took me back to when I was a child in a youth prison locked in solitary confinement, and how I used to scream. The pain of being in solitary confinement you don't understand until you've been there. COVID at the moment, people are using the language that we're locked up in hotels. It's nothing like prison, and we need to stop using that language because it minimises the actual real violence that's inflicted on us that are put in solitary. And hearing Storm wail and that deep trauma internally, I advocated for her to be released from solitary confinement, and we called a truce. And from that though, when I was released from prison, I said to the women, you know, I'm going to come back. The prison officers said, yeah, you'll be back, meaning I'll be back as a prisoner. But I didn't come back as a prisoner. I came back as myself, and how that we can work together. Because fundamentally, like the national network, it's nothing about us without us. That I can't do the work I do unless I do it with the women who are living in the prison now and that experience, or who have had this experience. Otherwise, I'm a fraud, you know. I believe that none of us are free until all of us are free. And so this is a fight for life. It'll be my fight for my life until the day I take my last breath. But when I come back, and that's the thing, nothing about us without us. We had our management meeting set up at Sisters Inside. We had some women out in the free world who hadn't been criminalised that we invited to come to our meetings. You know, we had like management committee board meetings once a month. and we used to have them in the chapel. And, you know, I was really clear that it couldn't be all the women except Storm because she murdered my friend. It had to be all women, which actually then made me take action to resolve the conflict between Storm and I, which was the murder. So this is about true reconciliation, and this is, you know, what we need to do in our life. And it is hard, because if you've been brutalized, assaulted, violated in any form, it's very difficult to resolve that with the other human being that's done that, inflicted that on you. But I got one of the women to ask Storm to come up to the chapel, and she was a bit freaked out, going, who, what, and she said, who's asked you to come? And Debbie's asked if you come up. So she came up. The other women who were still in prison, and I was coming in and out because I was on parole, Storm came and sat there, and we'd all lived through that murder, and it impacted on all of us, not just me because I got stabbed, the physical impact, but the trauma of living in a prison where someone's murdered. Being anywhere someone's murdered, it's a trauma, but being in a prison, it's even more so. And with Storm, I said, I want to resolve the conflict between us. I want to know why you did what you did. And I want us to be able to join together and move forward for all women, no matter what any woman's done. Because I value the human, not the behaviour. Because if I value only behaviour, I can't value a person if their behaviour is negative. So it's about how you unpack that. And Storm and I worked with, and the other women, for months in our management committee to actually resolve the conflict, to resolve the murder. And that was without prison staff. Prison staff didn't know about it. We do not need prison staff at all to interject in our lives. We know what we're doing. We're adult women. That's the other thing. We're adult women. You know, we're mothers, we're sisters, we're daughters, you know, we're friends, we're lovers, we're problem solvers, we're many things with many experiences. We're not just one thing, a prisoner. And that's where transformation is so important. But it seems like people out here in the free world will not allow people in prison to transform. You can transform, you know, you can change from today till tomorrow, but we are not allowed to. We are always seen in that behind the bars, the prisoner, the offender, the criminal, you know, the convict, whatever it is. And so Storm and I worked through that, and right up until for many years later, I advocated for her for parole, and she's been released, and we are very good friends. And we had to do the work though, and the work was hard and it's traumatic. But for us to live in a different society, that's what we need to do. You know, I see children now that if they get into a little tiff at, you know, my grandchildren at kindergarten, for example, you know, or at school, they're pulled apart, they're not, and they're sent to different corners or outside the room. We're not teaching our children to resolve conflict, to sit down and look at each other and say, well, when you hit me, that hurt, and I don't want to be hurt, and can you not hit me again, so that the other child understands. We have lost the skills, because what we've done is given that power to the state, to the police, to intervene in our lives, where we have now ringing police, whether it's school teachers, whatever it is, for children as young as 5, 4, 3, for police to intervene. Police are not social workers. Police are not mental health workers. Police are not conflict revolutioners. I don't know what the word is, but anyway. So, you know, they actually come in and escalate and not de-escalate. So we actually need, for example, as I said before, the $3.2 billion that went to police and prisons, and only 425 million, so 3.2 billion as opposed to 425 million, which is a petty cash in relation to 3.2 billion. That needs to be swapped, where social housing is funded to the tune of 3.2 billion, and police need to be defunded. I would say give them nothing, but if we've got to gradually defund them, you know, in a slow decline, fine, let them have 425 and move them out. Because we need to take charge of our own affairs. We do not need the police to intervene. And so we've got to unpack our subconscious police officer in our mind, that when you think of a behaviour or you see something, you call the cops. We actually need to be able to do the work ourselves and not call the cops. Cops escalate, cops kill. Prisons escalate, prisons kill. And as we've seen just recently, on the 9th of September, Auntie Sherry was found dead in a watch house, cold concrete cell. When she came into that watch house, she, I believe, should have been taken directly to a hospital. She was unwell, she wasn't, and by Thursday morning, she was found dead. These are the institutions and how they treat us. They're not what you think, what has been marketed for you to think. In the context you think racial capitalism, which is individualization, and that we have to take responsibility for our behavior, and therefore we go to prison to be rehabilitated so we're not recidivists. But see, I don't view it that way. There's people in our communities that get criminalised, predominantly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people of colour, and then poor white people. It's not the rich people at Ascot here, Hamilton, where all the money is, or wherever you are, in whatever jurisdiction you're in. There's more police allocated to poor, low socioeconomic areas and Aboriginal communities than there is in rich suburbs. And that's why we don't see those people criminalised, because they're untouchable. Because, like I said, cops and prisons protect the state, protect property, protect capitalism. And people are disposable, just as Tabitha said. So what we've got to do is start taking control ourselves about how we actually want to be and interact with each other. And do we really, as adults here, need police to come and intervene with a conversation that I was going to have with Storm, or that you're going to have with your neighbour because you've got a little bit of dispute? Why is it that we as adults have lost those skills and can't have a conversation, a hard conversation? Why is it that we are so individualised that we actually value property over people? It's because of racial capitalism. You know, when I was born, I had nothing, like nothing. You know, I have things around me. And when I die, I will have nothing. And I'm not going to say on my last breath on my dying bed, if that's how I die, that damn, I wish I had another $1,000, or damn, I wish I had another car. I will actually be wanting my family and my friends, my children, my grandchildren around my deathbed with me. But because of racial capitalism, we've become so individualized that we actually have lost the way to care and to speak for someone else, even our next door neighbors. And, you know, as a person who had COVID early on in the piece in March, and I saw when, you know, COVID started hitting here in this country, that people were saying, oh my God, I haven't spoken to this neighbor. I didn't even know this neighbor's name. And I've been living next door to them for 10 years. And I was actually shocked and not shocked, but really glad that people had to rely on each other for food, for transport, for whatever it is, to get medication, but to have conversations. So those fences, those bars were being broken down. But that's what we got to continue to do. When people say we got to go back to normal, I say no, we don't need normal. Normal is awful for all of us. And normal is something that will continue to traumatize First Nations people. So Sisters Inside, we have, what's it on? 4, if you like, arms of the organisation. So service provision and programs, we have community education and training, law reform and advocacy, and we have a law firm. Like, even though I've been in prison and have a long rap sheet, etc., I'm now a lawyer and have my own law firm, and it's based upstairs in this building. And so we do criminal defence work. From that, you know, some of you may have heard Sisters Inside, some not. But anything we do in any service provision and any law reform and any community training, education, etc., always comes from the position of a strategy of decarceration. So what is it that we're going to do to ensure that Mary doesn't get criminalised? Mary could be 2, Mary could be 20. What is it if she is criminalised in the watch house? We have a decarceration program there. How do we get her out of there? and keep her out on bail so she doesn't go back in. Women who are in prison, we're in prison in every prison in Queensland, that all our services are, how do we get Mary out? And then when we do get her out, how do we keep her out? And it's those fundamental things, that social housing, affordable housing, we all know that is the biggest issue. All international research around the world says the biggest issue for criminalising imprisoned people is lack of housing, and for when people get out of prison is lack of housing, affordable housing. So we need to take the 3.2 billion off the cops and prisons here and give it to social housing, and the cops can have 425 million. They're not going to be happy about that because they've got a big union. But I mean, we have to be strong enough as a community to say, that's it, we're done with these cops. We're done. Because what they actually do is escalate and kill. And that goes with prisons as well. So as a prison abolitionist, you know, and wanting to see the end of the prison industrial complex in all its forms, it came a time for us to be, and because we live in a world now, look, we've got, what do we got? 116 people on this Zoom. I know some people don't know a lot of people, but look at that, where we've connected. Like, it's awesome. And so we live in a world now that we can connect and actually move things very quickly. And we need to use the technology to our advantage, not our disadvantage. And so what it did was, like, I've always wanted to set up a national network of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women. And over the years, on my travels around the country and visiting prisons, and, you know, I think just being older and knowing so many more people, because, you know, the older you get, you know, you tend to gather more friends and memories and go to more places. Usually I've had that privilege to do that in my position. So, you know, I've made connections with many women across this country and around the world. There's an international network of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls as well. So this is not the first, but what it is though, it's the first in Australia where we've come together, and we have a number of women that are engaging now, and the word's out that continue to join the national network that is going to lead the conversation about the abolition of the prison industrial complex, about incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls. We demand that no one has a conversation without us, that we must be at the table. You know, we are the ones with the lived experience. We are the experts, and we need to be there. If you, as an academic, a policy maker, whatever it is, want to have a conversation about us, you must not do it without us. Otherwise, you're a fraud. And so the national network has come together, and we're hoping, fingers crossed, that the borders will open probably next year. And so we will have a face-to-face, our first face-to-face meeting of hundreds of women that have been incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. We've already started to document our values, our vision, you know, and other forms of communication. At the moment, everything's, the national network information is on Sisters Inside's website. We will have our own website, but for at the moment, we've added it to Sisters Inside, so you can find the information there. I think I might leave it there because it looks like there's only 10 minutes. I spoke for longer than what I thought. So thank you for all joining and listening to me. And thanks, Tabitha, for those excellent words that continue to make me uncomfortable. I actually want to be uncomfortable as a white person in this country.
Thank you very, very much, Debbie, and of course also to Tabitha. Now, we have gone over time, so we haven't got a lot of time, although I'm told we can go past 8:30, but Debbie, you said you can't. So I have some questions here. I'm not sure if they're best for you or for Tabitha, but maybe I'll just ask a few. So Ian McIndoe asked, how do we stop locking Aboriginal people up? What are the steps we can do? Social conditions, and for the first steps to be effective. Would one of you like to give that question a go?
I think that answer is really simple as well. We need to reimagine what is crime and redefine what is crime in this country. We are locking up people for being unwell. We're locking up people for being poor. like, I think it actually is really simple. I think we have this idea that all of this is incredibly complex. It's not. If we just started saying nobody is disposable, everyone deserves a place in this space, then we wouldn't exile people into prisons. We wouldn't punish people for being unwell or for being poor. I feel like it's really quite a simple thing, and we make it quite complex, the undoing of this. As Debbie said, it is literally about ripping the funds out of these places and putting it back in our communities. I mean, Aboriginal people existed in this space and in this country for eons, since the very first sunrise, without police, without a criminal justice system in the way we have it now, without prisons. I think that's why I don't have a hard time imagining abolition, because I feel like that this knowledge of what it was before exists within my DNA. So I would say, look to Aboriginal people for the answers. As I say, the solutions are at the margins and we sit in the margins. I think it's actually really quite simple.
Thank you. Great answer. I have a question from Tatiana. What are your thoughts about the intersection between criminal punishment system and the child protection system, particularly for Aboriginal mothers and in the context of abolitionism?
I mean, I'm sure Debbie would have some thoughts on this, but I would say that, you know, in my view, the child protection system is actually the child thieving system. It is an arm of the prison industrial complex. It creates a pipeline from their protected homes straight into prisons. That system is not serving neither the children or the mothers that they are stealing the children from.
Thank you. Did you want to say anything, Debbie, or will I move on?
No, I agree with Tabitha. And, you know, we see time and time again children being torn from their mothers and put into supposed state care, and then being, when they're old enough, because they don't behave like the nice baby, that the black baby, for example, given to the white family, you know, when they're 9, 10, they're actually thrown out like garbage. And then they're put in resi care and criminalised and pipelined into the youth prison system. We know that over 60% of women in our prison systems now have been children in state care, and the state has taken no responsibility for the failed parents that they continue to be time and time and time again. You know, like I just represented a little young Aboriginal girl who was put into care at 2 days old. She was diagnosed at 5 for having ADHD. Now, I don't know how you diagnose a 5-year-old child. 5-year-old children move. Like one of my granddaughters is nearly 4, and she's like buzzing around. But because this little one was buzzing around, they say she has ADHD and give her Ritalin. So here we are, giving a child speed, basically. And then, you know, she's disposed of a couple of years ago because she's 10 by the foster family. And so she's dumped then into the resi care. And then you see the criminalisation that's happening to her. And it's just tragic. She has no one in the world other than now Sisters Inside's Yanga program, which is all Aboriginal-led staff and works with criminalised and prison girls, predominantly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander girls, black girls. And that's the tragedy. This little girl, that's all she has. And you wonder why she doesn't trust anybody, because she has no one. But this is her story, but it's also the story of many, many, many children across this country. The so-called child protection system across this country and in the Western world is a fundamental failure. The money needs to go to support families to keep them together. But see, it's a welfare industry, you know, like we call the prison industrial complex, the prison industry. We have a welfare industry. We have so many people making money on the backs of the most marginalised, predominantly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in this conversation now about child stealing or child protection, whatever you want to call it. And people have got their livelihoods, you know, enmeshed in this so-called child protection system. So they don't want it changed. They might want to rearrange the deck chairs slightly, but they really don't want it to end. They don't want the money to go to families because they lose their jobs. So it's an industry, and it's about how do we unpack that industry, and that industry is part of racial capitalism.
Thank you, very insightful answer. Georgina has asked if she can get a copy of Tabitha's speech. Tabitha, do you have a way, or should she just listen to the recording?
Yeah, that would be fine. I mean, I could maybe put my email
in the chat. That would be fantastic. Then she can maybe. Okay. Richard Maria said, "Are you working with justice reinvestment?"
No.
Okay, that's a simple answer.
No, and can I just add that there cannot be justice in an unjust colony. So this notion of creating some other form of justice isn't going to work in this country the way it is.
Okay, thank you.
I just saw, sorry, some of the comments which I forgot to call out to Lisa, who's part of the national network. She's in there. Let me know she was there.
Okay. Are you going to ask, how can we inspire more constructive and imaginative solutions?
I think we need to have conversations like this. We need to have the time to have the conversations, to have people like yourselves open and willing to hear something different and to feel uncomfortable about what we're saying and then go and process that and not resist and push back to say that I don't agree, go away, you know, like many people will, but to let it filter through and feel the uncomfortableness about what we're saying and do some more reading. There's, you know, lots of great resources on the internet now. We can direct you to those as well, you know, to do the learning and about, you know, have a look, go and read some of Angela Davis, who's the lead, my sister leads this in the world. And, you know, she was just named the top 100 intellects in the actual, what do you call it? The world. So, you know, you can go and read Angela's stuff, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, and there's many more. But I mean, that's a couple to start with that can actually assist very quickly. It's easy to understand. They unpack it. And yes, usually like Ruthie will be talking sometimes about just the US, but also countries that are very poor. But I mean, it's relevant. The prison industrial complex has marketed itself and transported itself across every country, even third world countries, you know. So yeah, have a read and have a listen. Like they're on webinars like this and events all the time, because that's what's happening, you know, during COVID. You can sign up and listen to prison abolitionists talking about from prison abolition 101 through to more sophisticated. And like Tabitha said, that, you know, it's a continuum. So we all had to start somewhere, you know, like as a criminalised child from the age of 13, you know, of course I was institutionalised. So I was a reformist, because that's what the system did. You become institutionalised and then you're really just having arguments about, you know, can I have this food or this piece of fruit, or can I have an extra hour leave? We're not actually unpacking the system that's brutalizing us until something happens. And I'm not going to say what happened, but to actually go, there's got to be something better than this. And then, you know, so like I said, Ruthie and Angela are the lead thinkers in the sense where they can put those pieces together for you in a more broader context. And, you know, there's Aboriginal women in this country that are just fucking awesome and are leads, you know, like you can talk to Tabitha, Chelsea Bond, you know, she talks from the critical race theory. She's just unbelievably like brilliant. And so seek out some of those women, particularly Aboriginal women who are leaders, who are abolitionists, who are actually offering you something else than the status quo.
Thank you. Wonderful answers. We are running out of time, but I'm going to ask a few more, because if you can wait just a little bit longer, Debbie. Rosemary asks, are there any models out there with a public health focus? And I'm going to add one more question because they might be a little bit related. Criminalisation and disability, is there a connection? So those two questions.
I mean, there definitely is a connection between disability and criminalisation. A disproportionate number of people in prison have disabilities, whether they be physical, intellectual or mental. So there's absolutely a link. And that's that stuff about creating disposable people again. You know, we say that this person's behaviour is not okay and they become we dispose of them into prison. Look, we do it in our schools as well. We expel and suspend people. I saw someone asked a question about how you can bring abolitionist theory into schools. That's another example. We expel and suspend kids. We make our own children disposable in the system. So yeah, this is happening right across the board. And I forget what the first question was, so I have to leave that to Debbie because my mind went off.
I totally lost the first question too.
First one was about health.
Health. Yeah, because I was just actually, sorry, the reason why I got distracted is because I was just looking. So Liat Ben Moshe, so she's a woman with a disability in the US. She's just recently released a book called Decarcerating Disability. I'll have it here somewhere. I might be at home, but it's really good. It talks about the intersection of people with disabilities and those institutions, how they're prisons and how that form of control is very much the same as the prison and part of the prison industrial complex. So, and she's written a few things and you can watch her as well. There's things on YouTube that she's spoken at, and it's fantastic because it brings in the disability component that people are living with and connecting it to the whole prison industrial complex, the abolition of that. And, you know, and the way that we can find ways forward is to look at ways, communities that have been the most marginalised and how they've been part of the struggle to survive. So when you look at transgender communities and how they are so marginalised, but they have strategies and they've had strategies for such a long time to survive. We go back again, I'll say it again, First Nations people from the invasion of this country. The policy was, the strategy was from England, genocide. That didn't work. So we need to listen to First Nations people about how that never worked because of the resilience and because of the fight and the survival, that instinct to survive no matter what the white fella brought to this country. So, you know, there's groups already doing the work and have the answers. We just need to have those conversations with them and not just continue to have conversations with ourselves as a group of white people, you know?
Thank you. Just trying to decide which ones I should ask. Georgina asked, said, the Australian penal colony mentality, where do you see treaty and treaties as part of the solution?
I mean, I think that's a hard one because I'm an abolitionist, right, of abolishing prisons, but I'm also an abolitionist for Australia. Like, I want to abolish Australia totally. I don't think there will be justice or liberty for my people in the construction of Australia as it is right now, because the reality is that whitefellas need to continue oppressing and subjugating and dispossessing Aboriginal people in order for the construction of Australia to remain, right? So I don't think that my liberty is bound up in being included in a colonial manifesto like the Constitution. That being said, there is a place for truth-telling, and I think we need to start there.
Thank you. Another question from Richard and Maria. Who are your or our allies working on spreading and demanding non-violence and longing and calling for abolition of violence in many areas of our current dominator life? First of all, in the injustice system of everyday prisons and punishment focus.
Abolitionists take violence very, very seriously. It's one of the areas where we struggle with all the time. But I mean, we know of communities that actually don't call police. Well, we actually know of communities, even if they called the police wouldn't come. And that's Black communities, whether it's here in this country or other countries. So this myth about I call the cops because I'll be safe and they'll come is a lie if you're Black. But we as abolitionists take violence very seriously. and we work hard within our own communities to be anti-violence and anti-racist. So that is a part of the piece of the work to abolish the prison industrial complex, to be anti-racist, anti-violence. And so, you know, the conversations have to be ongoing about, like I said, with each other, about when someone's abusive, to pull it up, you know, get some boundaries around, have some conversations about that it's not acceptable. You know, it's a huge piece of work that has to be done, but it must be ongoing. And you know, even our own children. So, you know, my grandchildren who are 2.5 and nearly 4, you know, I'll see one hit the other and it'll be like, no violence. So they go, no violence, no violence. That's right, no violence. What's violence? No hitting, no biting, no scratching, no kicking. And so, you know, it's about the language that we give our children with the action to say no violence. And you know, they go to kindy, they both go to kindy just a couple of doors up from here, the office, and they tell the other kids, no violence, no hitting, no scratching, no biting, no kicking. And so by just that influence, that actually spreads out. But all of us have to do that work within our own family, our own community, and how that spreads out, and not relying on cops.
Thank you. There's just a comment here. Oh, sorry, did you want to say something, Tabitha?
Well, I've got to get to this other function.
Okay, thank you, Debbie.
I'm sorry, Tabitha.
That's okay.
No, that's all right. Tabitha, do you want to stay? I just need to go. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everybody, so much. Have a wonderful evening. See you all again next time.
Thank you. Bye. I'll just ask this other question. Just a comment that even a major US think tank agrees that family support, housing, jobs and education is the most effective way to reduce crime. Would you like to comment on that, Tabitha?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, I think, yeah, there's nothing I can add to that. That's a reality. I mean, it costs, you know, what, more than 80 grand a year to keep a person in prison. Imagine what would happen if you gave that person $80,000, how much their life would change. You gave them a house, you gave them a living wage, you supported them to be good parents, to have a job, all of that. Look, life could change if everyone was given things equally, but that's not the case, which is why we have to abolish systems that punish people for not having those things.
Okay. I think I might leave it there, unless anybody who hasn't had their question read out has a very burning passion to comment. Okay, no one's unmuting themselves. Well, I'd like to thank you both very, very much. It was very inspiring, I think, for everybody. And there's lots of comments in the chat saying thank you so much. And I won't read them out, but everyone's very impressed. And we had it was about 114 people on, so that's pretty impressive. Seeing as it was only really advertised the last couple of days, so it's a credit to you both for the work that you've done. And I'm sure we'd love to hear more about you, and we'll keep in touch. And did you put your email on the chat so that person who wanted to know if they could get your?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Fantastic. I missed it. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that's all. Unless I haven't thanked the technical people. It's such an important job. Thank you so much to Brumi and to Sabina for all that you have done in setting it up and keeping it all running smoothly. And also to tell you that we have next week we have another speaker. It's actually Lydia Thorpe. I've got to go through my notes and see if I can find it. But I think you might know who Lydia Thorpe is. She's the new senator from Victoria. She's from the Greens. She's replaced Richard Di Natale, and she's a strong and powerful woman. And I think it'll be wonderful having, I think, the first Aboriginal senator from Victoria. So please come along next week. And the link is in Eventbrite. So that'll be next. And there are altogether another 4 sessions after these 2. So it will continue on through the rest of October and into November. And yes, and this is just a note that the recording will be posted on Reconciliation for Western Sydney, virtual building bridges. So anybody who wants to have a copy of it and share it with their friends, please do so. Reconciliation for Western Sydney website. Thank you, and fantastic. And I will close the the session down. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. Bye.